Hi, I'm Mark Tyrrell of Uncommon Knowledge and hypnosisdownloads.com, and welcome to Stop Arguing Your Relationships to Death. 7 ways to stop arguing and get along better with other people. Now, I was staying in a hotel once and I reached a point where I had to bury my face in the pillow, stuff cotton wool into my ears. I even tried whistling Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, but it was no use. I could still hear the infernal arguing from the hotel bedroom next door, which sort of contaminated my ears like relationship toxic waste, and I couldn't take any more. I needed sleep, so I had to do something. So choosing the first sensible option I can think of, I focused my mind in an attempt to influence them telepathically, but that didn't work, weirdly enough. And it's amazing how desperation stimulates the belief in the supernatural. So anyway, surprisingly, that had little effect. So I decided at 1 a.m. to fling my Britishness aside and knock on their door to complain. So, why do we argue, and what the blazes is wrong with it anyway? So I want to talk about how arguing ruins relationships, or certainly how constant arguing can do. If you were raised in an argumentative household, it may feel natural to argue a lot. Maybe you get a buzz from the excitement that arguing brings, and some people feel, arguing is the mainstay of our relationship. But whatever the cause is, chronic arguing brings problems, and not just for the neighbours. So sure, most of us argue sometimes, and it would be a boring world if we all saw things in exactly the same way, or if we didn't stand up to other people when they were sort of transgressing our boundaries. But destructive arguing can destroy valuable relationships. And the opposite of arguing isn't agreement in all things. It's knowing how to disagree and still maintain mutual respect and liking. Okay, so here are 7 tips to help you stop arguing if it's sometimes a problem for you in your relationships. Okay, so tip number 1, you stop arguing. Okay, so take responsibility. It takes 2 to argue. Instead of thinking, well, they started it, or look to yourself. Okay, they're trying to argue, but I'm not going to. Okay, if you deny fire oxygen, that fire will not burn. Instead, recognize areas where you can agree and focus on those areas. People will feel more connected to you and willing to cooperate when you can make at least some agreement statements, such as, I can see why you'd think that, okay, or I realize what you're saying. And you don't always have to follow those up with a but, okay? Ask questions and listen to the answers as well. Tip number 2, stop arguing by binning the insults. The famous psychologist John Gottman, check out reference 1 in the written version of this, the article version of this, discovered that the way a couple argue is a big predictor of whether they'll break up in the future. He got very good at predicting future relationship breakup. If their arguments, if their tiffs contain criticism rather than complaint, then the relationship is headed towards meltdown. Character assassination is a huge no-no when it comes to keeping friends and lovers. When you criticize, you overgeneralize negatively about the other person's whole identity. So, I'll describe what I mean. If someone forgets to pick up some milk, and you ask them to pick up some milk, you could say, "You're such a lazy slob." Okay, that would be a criticism because it attacks their whole character. That is what they are like. The implication is that that's all they are. Okay, whereas a complaint would be something like, "I'm upset that you forgot the milk." That's a reasonable complaint because it's specific. Okay. Avoid criticizing rather than complaining, and remember to let people know when they make you happy as well. Okay, not just when they do stuff wrong. Number 3, stop trying to convince people by arguing with them. You might be right, but arguing isn't a great way to convince people. And why is that? because if they're defensive and angry, they'll be unable to hear you. The issue isn't about what you're arguing about, quite often. People are like radio transmitters when it comes to communication. They're either set to receive or transmit. Arguing is akin to all participants being stuck on transmit and no one being clicked on to receive. This is known technically as a waste of time. So logic only penetrates when someone is calm enough to let it. Plus, people often care more about being seen to be right when they argue rather than actually being right. Okay, it's not necessarily just a search for truth when we're arguing with someone. So just state your case once and forget it. Strong emotion swamps the thinking part of the brain. Check out reference 2 in the article. So trying to convince someone whilst you or they are highly emotional or very angry or feeling insulted won't work. Okay. Tip number 4, stop arguing about the past. So when couple counselling, one of the tasks I sometimes set a cantankerous couple is to continue arguing. This is usually pretty easy for them, but only argue about issues relating to the past 7 days. On no account can they time travel back further in time than that week. So this stops it spiraling out of control. You know, if a woman and a man, for example, are arguing about the fact that she feels he ignored her at last night's party, then suddenly she brings up that time in 1984 when he was late to her friend's wedding. Then he reminds her of the way she insulted him in front of his colleagues back in 1990 and so on. We've got the equivalent of a minor border skirmish turning into an all-out nuclear war. Okay, so constantly going back to stuff someone did wrong weeks, months or years before is toxic. What's done is done. Stick to specifics. Okay, my couples found arguments grew shorter because they had less ammunition to fire at one another when they stopped time traveling so much. So agree to argue only about stuff that happened within the previous week period. Okay. Tip 5. Give yourself 30 minutes to calm down. So here's what happens. You know, two people are having a heated argument and one person goes into another room to cool off. And after 10 minutes, they feel calmer. Okay, they might convince themselves, you know, I've calmed down now. So they go back into the same space as the other person they've been arguing with. But what happens? Even though both parties felt calmer, suddenly they're back fighting again. It's as if you thought the fire was out, but then you walk past it and it flares up again. Okay. Feeling calmer and being calmer can be two different things. It takes about 30 minutes or so to calm down physiologically after a heated row. So give it more time. You know, you can feel calm again after 10-15 minutes, go back into it and it just flares up again because the spark's still there. You need 30 minutes or so for the physiological effects of the stress to calm down. And during the cool-off time, refrain from rehearsing in your head all the things you want to say to set them straight. Okay. Instead, think cooling thoughts and remember times when you were getting along better with this person. Okay. How you can get on with them. Tip number 6, stop taking it to heart. Argumentative people tend to take things personally even when they certainly weren't intended that way. This leads to a breakdown in communication. If someone is very critical, then either they have never learned a better way of communicating or they're so angry they're just overgeneralizing out of control. So criticisms are always overgeneralizations. Either way, it's their problem. Practice taking time in your mind before you respond to people. Count to 10 inwardly and ask yourself, how can I respond to this calmly, rising above it? If you're too defensive, people eventually stop trying to communicate with you at all because of the hassle. They feel that they have to tread on eggshells around you, and that actually drives away intimacy because you don't have a connection with them anymore. So the next tip surprises many people. Tip number 7, keep a lid on it. Know when to button it. Okay, know when not to talk. Contrary to popular thinking, being totally honest by voicing every thought, always having everything out in the open, can be disastrous for relationships. Couples who've been happily together for decades have learned what not to talk about. See reference 3 in the written article. Okay, knowing what to steer clear of can be part of nourishment for a relationship. Learn to keep quiet about such things if you know someone gets upset about them. When you criticize their mother or talk about how you passed your driving test at their first attempt and they didn't, or whatever it is. But you get to know the areas of sensitivity for your partner. You don't have to address everything all the time and have everything out in the open all the time. Okay, that makes the relationship feel like hard work. If you know when the minefield is, if you know where it is, steer clear of it. So here's something else to keep in mind. Research has shown that people who are able to apologize are more likely to be married and stay married than those who can never say sorry. Okay, some very solid research on this. And keep your sense of humor. Knowing how to diffuse arguments through humor is a great skill. This doesn't mean that you always have to apologize, but if you can apologize on occasion and be humorously self-deprecating when you do so, okay, I'm sorry I shouted, but this heat seems to turn me into Jack Nicholson from The Shining or whatever, okay, so much the better. So with all this in mind, going back to my hotel experience, I crept like some therapeutic ninja out into the corridor and mustering up as much anti-Britishness and dignity as the hotel issue dressing gown allowed me, I hesitantly knocked on the ramming couple's door. And after muffled mumblings, a large man, naked above the waist, so it could have been worse, timidly opened the door. And he said, "Hi, I'm so sorry, have we been keeping you awake?" "Well, as a matter of fact, you have." "I promise we'll stop arguing now," he assured me. "And all I can do is apologize on behalf of my wife. I really don't know what's got into her tonight." Okay, so much for tip number 1. And I stumbled back to my room and managed to get some sleep that night. So I hope you found that useful, and if you did, please hit like and subscribe. And if you want to hear when my next video is published, hit the notification bell below this video. I'm Mark Tyrrell of Uncommon Knowledge and hypnosisdownloads.com. And if you'd like to try some of my personal development products, head over to hypnosisdownloads.com and take a look around. And thanks for watching.